I never asked to be noticed. That was the whole point of being a cleaner in Kronovar Manor, to become part of the marble and the shadows so invisible that the world could pretend I didn't exist. The crystal hall was alive that night, a swirling mass of light and sound that made my chest tight. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, their facets scattering light like captured stars across the polished marble floor. The air was thick with the scent of honeyed wine and expensive perfumes, while the strings of the orchestra wove through the laughter of nobles and merchants and generals. I kept my head down, dragging the mop across the cold stone in steady, practiced strokes. My boots were old, the soles worn thin from years of this same motion. The blue tunic of the cleaning staff hung loose on my frame, the cuffs frayed at the edges. No one glanced my way. They never did unless they needed a spill wiped up or a path cleared. To them, I was nothing more than the man who made the floor shine. Then the voice cut through the music like a blade. Is it true that Lady Arzaka is secretly seeing one of the cleaners in the manor? The hall seemed to hold its breath. The music faltered for a split second. Heads turned. The weight of 100 eyes shifted, searching for the source of the rumor. The speaker was a drunken journalist, one of those men who thrived on scandals among the powerful. He swayed slightly, his glass sloshing, a smug grin splitting his face. Lady Arzaka Varkesh stood on the central dais, tall and commanding in her black velvet gown, edged with silver. The necklace of blue gems at her throat, her mother's, caught the light as she turned. For one brief, terrible moment, her amber eyes flicked toward the shadows where I stood, my mop still in my hands. The silence stretched sharp as glass. Then she spoke, her voice ringing clear and cold across the hall. I will never date a cleaner. The words landed like a slap. My hands froze on the mop handle. I looked up from the floor, meeting her gaze for the first time that night. Her expression was perfect, composed, distant, the mask of a leader who could not afford weakness. But in that split second, something else flickered in her eyes. Not pure contempt, something sharper, something that looked almost like regret forced into a blade. The hall erupted in whispers. Laughter rippled through the crowd, cruel and delighted. I felt every eye on me now, the invisible man suddenly dragged into the light. My face burned, but I didn't speak. What was there to say? I simply lowered my gaze back to the marble floor and continued mopping as though nothing had happened. But everything had. The rest of the night blurred into a haze of forced normalcy. Servants whispered as they passed me in the corridors. Guards smirked. By morning, the story would spread through every workshop and quarter of the manor like wildfire. I finished my shift in silence, the weight of her words pressing on my chest like a stone. When I finally stepped out into the cold night air, the lights of Kronovar Manor glowed on the hill behind me like a distant star I could never reach. My small house at the edge of the old craftsman's quarter was dark when I arrived, but a single candle flickered in the window. Mira was waiting. My daughter was 8 years old, her brown hair tied in uneven braids, her small frame too thin for a child her age. She sat by the hearth, a bowl of warm porridge in her hands, her eyes lighting up the moment she saw me. "Father," she cried, running to wrap her arms around my legs. "I kept the porridge warm for you, just like you like it." I knelt down, pulling her close, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and the faint herbal soap I used on her clothes. "Thank you, little star. Let me wash up first." While I cleaned the day's grime from my hands, Mira chattered about her lessons, about the boy who pulled her braid, about the story the teacher had read. I listened, nodding at the right moments, smiling when she looked up expectantly. Later, after she had fallen asleep with her head on my lap, I sat by the window, staring at the distant lights of Kronovar Manor glowing on the hill like a false star. I kept seeing Arzaka's face in that moment, the way her eyes had met mine right before she spoke those cruel words. It wasn't pure contempt. There was something else there. Fear. Maybe even shame. I clenched my fist until my knuckles hurt. Not because she had humiliated me in front of the entire nobility, but because for one fleeting second I had seen the woman behind the mask and she had looked almost as trapped as I was. I hated that I noticed. 3 days after the humiliation in the Crystal Hall, I was still trying to forget the way Lady Arzaka's words had sliced through the air. I worked the night shift as usual, moving silently through the corridors. Around 2 in the morning, I found her father's pocket watch lying on the marble floor near the elevator shaft. The glass was cracked, the mechanism inside, silent and dead. I knew what it was immediately. Everyone in the manor knew the story of Lord Varkesh's final watch. It was the last thing he held before he died at his workbench. A sacred relic to Lady Arzaka. I should have left it there. But something in me, the old part that once lived for precision and beauty, wouldn't allow it. I took it back to the small hidden workshop I maintained in the basement, the one no one knew about. For the next few hours, under the dim light of a single lantern, I worked. The mechanism was ancient and complex, far beyond what any ordinary cleaner should understand. But I had not always been a cleaner. By dawn, the watch was alive again. New glass perfectly fitted, the gears turning with that clean, precise tick I remembered from better days. Before I returned it, I used the finest needle to engrave 3 small words inside the lid, Van Conche. Still running. I slipped back into her private chambers using the master key all cleaning staff carried and placed the watch on her desk. Then I left as quietly as I had come. The next morning, the manor was buzzing. I was polishing the brass railings on the west corridor when I heard footsteps that were too deliberate to be casual. Lady Arzaka appeared alone except for one trusted guard. She stopped a few paces away. Mr. Ashmore. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. She wore the watch openly on a chain around her neck now. I straightened. My lady. She held up the watch. You did this. It wasn't a question. I didn't deny it. It belonged to you. Now it works again. How her voice dropped. Every master horologist in the kingdom said it was beyond repair. The internal mechanism was too damaged. Too old. I wiped my hands on the rag. I used to work with mechanisms like this. A long time ago. Her amber eyes narrowed. A cleaner who can restore my father's watch when the greatest craftsman failed. That is not a simple answer. I met her gaze evenly. Some answers are simpler if you don't ask too many questions. She stepped closer. Did my father know you? The question hit harder than I expected. I looked away for a moment. He knew enough, I said quietly. He was the last man in this world who judged me by my work rather than my circumstances. He didn't deserve to die the way he did. For the first time, I saw something crack in Lady Arzaka's perfect mask. A flicker of pain, recognition, maybe even guilt. She didn't press further, but as she turned to leave, she paused. I will find out who you really are, Galen Ashmore. I watched her walk away, the watch ticking softly against her chest. That night, for the first time in years, I felt something dangerous stir inside me. Not fear, curiosity, and the terrifying realization that Lady Arzaka Varkesh had begun to see me. Part 3. 3 days after I returned her father's watch, Lady Arzaka began to watch me. I felt it first in the corridors, the way her footsteps would slow when she passed the west railing I was polishing. Then in the way her amber eyes would linger a second too long before she turned away. She never spoke. Not yet. But I knew she was piecing me together like one of her precious clockwork mechanisms. That afternoon, I left the manor early to pick up Mira from school. The little schoolhouse sat at the edge of the craftsman's quarter, a modest stone building where the children of laborers learned their letters and numbers. I was a few minutes late because the head butler had kept me scrubbing an extra corridor. When I rounded the corner, Mira was already waiting on the front steps, her small satchel clutched tight, her uneven braids bouncing as she spotted me. Father, she cried, launching herself into my arms the moment I knelt down. I caught her easily, spinning her once before setting her on the step beside me. Sorry I'm late, little star. Did you wait long? She shook her head, already pulling out her slate. Look, I got every sum right today. Teacher said I'm the fastest in class. I sat there on the dusty steps while she explained each number, her small finger tracing the chalk marks with fierce concentration. The afternoon sun warmed my back. For those few minutes, the manor, the whispers, and Lady Arzaka's watchful eyes felt very far away. I didn't know Arzaka was watching from her unmarked carriage across the street. Later that evening, after Mira had fallen asleep with her head on my lap, I returned to the manor for the night shift. Lady Arzaka was waiting near the supply room. Mr. Ashmore. I stopped, mop in hand. My lady. She stepped closer, voice low. I saw you today, with your daughter. My stomach tightened. You followed me, I needed to understand. She paused. She loves you very much. She's all I have left. Something shifted in her expression, not pity, but recognition. The kind that comes when two people realize they're both carrying heavier loads than they show. From that night on, our conversations grew longer. She began finding reasons to be in the corridors where I worked. At first, they were short exchanges about the weather or the next banquet. Then they became real. She told me how her father had died at his workbench 5 years ago, collapsing mid-sentence while explaining a new gear ratio to her. How she had taken the title at 30 and spent every day since trying to prove she was worthy of it. How she hated the balls but attended them anyway because the family name demanded it. In return, I told her pieces of my story. How Mira loved stories about gentle dragons who protected villages instead of burning them. How I still burned the porridge every morning but kept trying because it made her laugh. How some nights I sat by the window staring at the manor lights and wondered what my life would have looked like if the fire had never happened. One quiet evening in the old clock tower wing, she asked the question I had been waiting for. Why did a man like you end up cleaning floors? I set down my rag and looked at her. The moonlight coming through the high windows painted her green skin in soft silver. 12 years ago, I was the youngest master horologist accepted into the Eldermere Guild. I had my own workshop, a wife, a future. Then the workshop burned. Someone accused me of stealing designs and using cheap materials. They destroyed my reputation, seized my tools, and left me with nothing. My wife couldn't bear the shame and the endless court cases. She left. Only Mira stayed. Lady Arzaka's eyes never left my face. My father knew about this. He knew enough. He offered help once. I was too proud to take it. She was silent for a long time. Then she said softly, "You're not a cleaner, Galen. You never were." The way she said my name, not Mr. Ashmore, not the servant, made something crack inside my chest. The rumors in the manor had grown louder by then. Servants whispered when we passed each other. Guards smirked. One night, as I was finishing my shift in the back courtyard, 3 soldiers from one of the Eastern Branch families stepped out of the shadows. "You think you're special cleaner," the leader sneered. "The lady might smile at you now, but when she tires of her little toy, you'll be thrown out like the rest of the trash." I didn't answer. I simply kept wiping the railing. One of them shoved me hard against the stone wall. "Remember your place, human." I tasted blood where my lip had split. Before the second blow could land, Lady Arzaka's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "Enough." She stepped into the courtyard, flanked by 2 of her personal guards. The soldiers froze. "Leave him," she ordered. "Now." They obeyed instantly, melting back into the shadows. When they were gone, she turned to me. I was still leaning against the wall, wiping blood from my mouth. "You didn't have to do that," I said quietly. "I already did," she answered. "The moment you fixed my father's watch, I became involved. The moment I decided to see you as a man instead of a shadow, I became involved." I looked at her, then really looked. The perfect Lady Arzaka Varkesh, ruler of the most powerful orc house in the north, standing in a back courtyard at midnight defending a cleaner. And for the first time in 12 years, I didn't feel invisible. The distance between us had begun to change. 2 nights after our conversation in the clock tower wing, Lady Arzaka summoned me again. This time, it wasn't in the manor. She sent a short note through one of her trusted maids, meet her at the Lantern Tavern on the western edge of the city after midnight. No guards, no titles, just her and me. I left Mira sleeping under the care of our neighbor and walked through the cold streets with my hood up. The tavern was small, smoky, and filled with the kind of people who ask no questions. She was already there, sitting at a corner table, wearing a plain cloak that hid her noble bearing. The pocket watch hung openly at her throat, ticking softly. She didn't speak until I sat down. Then she placed a thick sealed folder on the table between us. The black wax bore the old crest of House Varkesh. "I found this in my father's private vault," she said, voice low. "Behind the trade ledgers. It was never meant to be opened." I opened the folder. Inside were letters, signed statements, and a thick pouch of gold that had never been delivered. My name was everywhere. The fire at my workshop 12 years ago had not been an accident. A rival guild had paid to steal my designs, then framed me. My father-in-law at the time had known the truth, and so had Lord Varkesh. He had proof. He could have cleared my name in a single day. Instead, he stayed silent. He let the courts destroy me because speaking up would have cost him a lucrative contract with the very guild that ruined me. The gold in the pouch was supposed to be compensation. He had kept it along with the letters like a secret shame he could never quite bury. I read every page without speaking. My hands didn't shake. They were too numb for that. When I finally looked up, Lady Arzaka's face was pale. "My father knew you were innocent," she whispered. "He chose silence to protect the family's business. He let you lose everything." I closed the folder slowly. "Your father was the last man I respected in this world, and he sold me for a contract." The words came out flat, but they cut deeper than any shout could have. She didn't flinch. "I will make this public. I will tear apart every agreement built on that lie. I will give you back your name, your title as Master Horologist, and a position in the manor with full authority. You and Mira will never want for anything again." I stared at her. "You would burn half your family's power to do this, Is." "Why?" "Because I'm not my father," she said. "And because the man who fixed my father's watch deserves better than to spend the rest of his life cleaning floors while I wear the guilt of his ruin around my neck." The tavern noise faded around us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I need time," I finally said. My voice sounded strange even to me. She nodded once. "Take all the time you need." I left the tavern before dawn, the folder tucked under my arm like a wound I couldn't yet feel. The next morning, the manor exploded. An emergency council meeting had been called. By the time I arrived for my shift, rumors were already flying through the corridors. Someone had leaked the story. Someone had seen Arzaka and me at the tavern. Someone had found the folder. The great hall was packed with every branch of House Varkesh. Arzaka stood at the head of the long table, back straight, face calm. But I could see the storm in her eyes. One of the Eastern Branch Lords slammed his fist down. "You would destroy everything your father built over a cleaner, over a human who was already broken when he came here." Another voice rose. This is madness. The entire city is laughing at us. The Lady of Kronovar defending a disgraced craftsman because she feels guilty. They tore into her from every side. They reminded her of every contract, every alliance, every fragile thread holding House Varkesh above the other orc houses. They told her that if she spoke the truth, half the family would turn against her. They demanded she stay silent and let the past stay buried. Arzaka listened to all of it without interrupting. Then she looked straight at me where I stood at the back of the hall still wearing my cleaner's tunic and said the words that would change everything. I will not stay silent. The truth will be told. Galen Ashmore will have his honor returned. And if this house cannot survive without lies, then perhaps it does not deserve to stand. The hall erupted. I watched her face as the shouting grew louder. She had just set fire to the world she had spent 5 years holding together with iron will. And she had done it for me. For the first time in 12 years, I realized I was no longer invisible. But the choice she had just made was going to cost her everything she had built, and I didn't know if I could let her pay that price alone. Part 5. The council chamber was packed so tightly the air felt thick enough to choke on. Every branch lord, every master craftsman, every merchant tied to House Varkesh sat in their carved seats, eyes burning holes into Arzaka, where she stood at the head of the long obsidian table. I waited outside the heavy doors with Mira's small hand in mine. My daughter's fingers trembled, but her chin stayed high. When the doors finally swung open, Arzaka's voice carried clear and steady across the hall. Bring him in. I stepped forward, Mira at my side. Every head turned. Whispers rippled like poison through water. I still wore my cleaner's tunic, faded blue and threadbare at the cuffs. I had not changed. I refused to pretend I was anything else until the truth had been spoken. Arzaka did not waste words. She lifted the sealed folder and read her father's letter aloud, every damning line. The chamber fell into stunned silence as she named the rival guild, the stolen designs, the deliberate silence that had destroyed me 12 years ago. When she finished, she placed the folder on the table like a gauntlet. House Varkesh owes Galen Ashmore a debt of honor, she declared. Today we pay it. Shouts erupted. Lords slammed fists on wood. Accusations flew. One of the Eastern branch heads rose, face twisted with rage. You would burn everything your father built for a human servant. Arzaka's gaze never wavered. I would burn every lie that holds this house together if it means we stand on truth instead. Then she looked straight at me. Galen. I walked to the center of the chamber where the ancient master clockwork mechanism lay on its velvet cloth, the one no horologist in the kingdom had been able to restore. The same one her father had died trying to perfect. I sat down. Mira stayed at the edge of the room watching with wide eyes. My hands, still rough from years of mops and buckets, moved over the tiny gears as though they had never forgotten. The chamber grew so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat between each precise click. One gear, then another, a spring tensioned just right. The final pinion slid home. The mechanism gave a single perfect tick. Then another, then a steady living rhythm that filled the entire hall. I set the tools down. No one spoke. Arzaka's voice rang out once more. From this day, the Chamber of Restoration belongs to Galen Ashmore. He will answer to no one but the truth of the work itself. And any man or woman who still calls him cleaner will answer to me. The vote was not even needed. The silence itself was the answer. Later that night, long after the torches had burned low and Mira had fallen asleep in the new quarters prepared for us, Arzaka found me in the clock tower courtyard. The great gears above us turned slowly in the starlight, their shadows dancing across the stone. She wore no jewels tonight. Just a simple cloak and the pocket watch still ticking against her heart. You didn't have to do any of this, I said. I did. She answered. For the first time in 5 years, I feel like I'm standing on solid ground instead of a stage. I looked at her, really looked, without the weight of titles or rumors or fear between us. If I step forward now, I said quietly, there is no going back to the shadows. She took one step closer. Then, step forward, Galen Ashmore. I closed the distance between us. My hand rose to touch the side of her face, green skin warm beneath my calloused fingers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in, and when our lips met, it was not the kiss of a lady and a servant. It was the kiss of two people who had both been trapped behind masks for far too long and had finally chosen to set them down. Above us, the tower clocks kept their steady rhythm, marking time that no longer felt like a chain. In the weeks that followed, the world did not change overnight. Some lords left in anger. Some servants still whispered. But Mira laughed louder in the halls and the workshops rang with new purpose. Arzaka stood taller, no longer carrying her father's silence like a crown. And I, for the first time in 12 years, woke each morning as a man who built things instead of cleaning up after them. We never went back to being what the world had tried to make us. We simply became what we chose to be, together.